When we're talking about climate change and green transition, there are inevitably a lot of legal issues. So we're now moving to the world of law. We need better regulations. We need better legislation on this field. And we have the pleasure of having one of the foremost experts right before the coffee break on issues of labor law, who is Piera Loi, who is a professor of labor law at the University of Cagliari, and one of the experts that has been not just working on these issues in Italy, but participating enormously in a lot of European projects and extending it into the whole realm of the European Union. So, Piera, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrés, and of course, thank you to the Cañada Blanch and to the CaixaBank for this very thought-provoking Foro. I'm a labor lawyer, as Andrés was saying, and all the things that we have heard in the previous presentation are very provoking for me. But at the same time, I found some interesting issues to be discussed. The title of my presentation is How to Balance Employment and Green Transition. So, in order to explain how to balance, how to strike a balance between employment and green transition, I need to use two key concepts. The first one is the risk, and the second one is balancing. And they're both essential concepts in regulation, in modern, I would say modern law or modern labor law. Risk is, of course, something that it's a concept that we are familiar with. But first of all, it has been analyzed in social sciences, and it's also, of course, a legal concept. I think that we need to start from Ulrich Beck's definition of risk, and risk is considered as the main feature of modern societies. Our societies are called by Beck as risk societies. We all know that risk is a feature of our society because we have faced risks like the pandemic, like the financial crisis, so the financial risks, the environmental risks. So we live in a risk society from different point of views. But these risks are produced, they're not, as we could say, natural. They are produced by the same society, by the activities of the human beings. Of course, the environmental risk that we are talking about in this forum is created by the activities of humans. And the main issue that law has to deal with is that we have to find ways to distribute risks. In the traditional societies, the issue, let's say the distributive justice problem was how to distribute wealth. Now it's how to distribute risks. So the law has to solve, and of course political decisions have to solve these distributive justice issues. How to distribute risks. We cannot accept that risks of any kind are borne only by a part of a society and maybe by the weaker part of a society. And of course, I have to analyze this issue from the point of view of workers, since I'm a labor lawyer. So all these risks, and particularly the environmental risks, cannot be borne only by some kinds of workers. So this is the question that I should analyze. But risk is also a way of categorizing the reality. So as a French lawyer and sociologist François Eval says, nothing in itself is a risk and everything can be a risk. So we can categorize the whole reality in terms of risks. But of course, law, since I am a lawyer, law is an instrument, is a tool to invent, to to find the mechanisms useful to face risks. Risks have a negative, let's say, a negative effect. In the European legislation, risks are not called risks, they're called negative or adverse impacts. And so, as it's very important that law finds the mechanism to face these adverse impacts, these risks. So, labor law, in particular, is a complex set of rules which aims is to protect workers against social risks. So we can, let's say, describe all labor law norms as ways to protect from social risks, ways or techniques to protect workers from social risks. So I'm suggesting, you know, to look at labor law rules that I will analyze partially, of course, as techniques to protect workers from social risks and also from environmental risks. Of course, there are many kinds of risks. We have made reference to environmental risks. And what is, I think, it needed to be underlined and highlighted is that environmental risks are global. We have seen, like, for example, in your analysis, Teis, of course you have analyzed the environmental issues from a, let's say, domestic perspective, Denmark or Sweden, but we do not have to forget that environmental risks are global. So we should find global answers. We should find global tools, techniques to face these environmental risks, which are global by definition. So it's, first of all, I would like to underline the fact that we need global regulations. Of course, we are making an effort, we're trying to have at least European set of rules to face to face these global environmental risks, but it's not enough. We should find a way to face globally these risks. And the other important thing is that in the recent EU legislation, environmental risks and human rights risks are together, and social risks are together. In the recent EU legislation, we will give some examples. Companies are required to adopt a sustainability approach in order to face both environmental and social rights risks. So they're together. But then it comes to the question that you raised, not talking about rights and risks, but of course talking about missions. You were criticizing Mazzucato theory, saying, is there a hierarchy between missions? And I have the same question. Is there a hierarchy between fundamental rights under attack because of risks? Because of course, when I talk about risk in law, I always have in mind that a risk is analyzed by the law, is taken into account by the law, because a risk, a global risk, is compromising the same existence of a fundamental right. So, in the language of the European legislation, they say that European legislation is obliging companies or suggesting companies to have a different attitude, to have a sustainability approach, in the sense that they have to adopt some procedures in order to control, some ways to manage risks that have an adverse impact on fundamental rights, on social and human rights, and on the environment. So I don't know if it's clear, the link. And then the other word is balancing. Balancing is a law word, is a technical word. Because we need balancing. Balancing is one of the most important feature of modern constitutional systems. Why is it so sorry, important balancing? Because as we have understood from what our colleagues have said until now, there is often a conflict. You could have conflict between fundamental rights. For example, you could have a conflict between the environment and the freedom and the market freedom. A company, for example, I don't know, in the Spanish constitution and in the Italian constitution and also in the EU treaties, they are protected, companies are protected in their economic freedoms. But at the same time, you have other fundamental rights, like, for example, the right of workers to have their employment protected. And you have also the environment rights. So you need a balancing every time there are fundamental rights in conflict. And there is a fundamental rule beyond, let's say, sustaining balancing, is that when there is a conflict between fundamental rights, I quoted here the words of the Italian court, constitutional court. Balancing rights avoids that one right can become a tyrant in respect of the others. There is no hierarchy among fundamental rights, since all rights are expression of human dignity. Okay, so we need balancing. If there was a clear hierarchy between fundamental rights, you do not need balancing. But since there isn't such a hierarchy among missions, you said, I say we are looking for the existence of a hierarchy between fundamental rights. What would you say? Is it more important the environment, or is it more important that the worker keeps its employment and the right to, to earn wages to go on in living? I'm sure that I can have different answer from the audience, but for sure it's very difficult to say that there is a hierarchy. So we need balancing. And the question is, who is striking the balance? Who is the actor having the legitimacy to balance rights, to balance fundamental rights, and to balance risks? What would you answer? I mean, it seems that you were saying, Ty, sorry if I quote you every time. And also, Susana's paper was in the kind of direction. First of all, you would put researchers and academics, maybe, because, we have the knowledges, we have the data. I'm a little bit, suspicious about this data, primacy, because, if we concentrate too much on data, then we think that also machine can use data, and we leave the analysis to AI, for example. Your analysis on the IQ was very interesting in that sense. As a labor lawyer, I would say, first of all, labor law is a very useful, area of law where you can use different tools in order to make this kind of balance. First of all, we have to recognize that the last balance, the last technique of balance should be left to judges. I know that in these days it's very difficult to, it could be revolutionary if you want to say that judges, they need to have this power, because in many cases they are under attack, judges. In Italy they are totally under attack in this moment, but also in the United States, for example, and also in Spain maybe, I don't know, yeah. But judges, at least constitutional judges, okay? But also, first instance judges make a balance, but they are not the only one, of course. Also, also in any democratic institutions, parliament do a balancing. When they adopt legislation, they're making a balance. But legislators could be under the scrutiny of constitutional court if their balance is unbalanced, okay? But labor law knows other instruments, like, for example, collective agreements. In a collective agreement, you have a balance. If in a company or in a sector there is a huge problem of producing I don't know, a new system producing a pollution, or producing or not going toward a sustainability mission, you can find the way to strike a balance with unions and employers, or unions and employers association. Collective agreements are a place where the balance could be made. But anyway, just I don't know how much.
You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Let's see how the European Union is trying to, to strike a balance, because of course the European Union is. We have a legislator, and we have had lately many legislative instruments adopted. Some of them they're not binding instruments. Some of them are. So we can make an analysis. And in some cases, the balance is very light. For example, in the famous European Green Deal, which is a communication of the EU Commission to the other institution, which is a political and not a binding instrument, where there is a strike between employment and the green transition. I see it in the objectives, in the aims of the European Green Deal, because it is said that European Green Deal and the European pillar of social rights will guide action in ensuring that no one is left behind. I see here a possible balance between the green transition and the employment and workers' rights, because it is explicitly said that the action of the European Union toward this main objective of the green transition will have to take into account that no one is left behind. This is a kind of fundamental right, apart from the green transition. From one side we have the green transition, from the other side we have the principle, the fundamental principle, no one is left behind. And that's what Andrés was trying to explain us, that there are vulnerabilities across the Europe, that the risk is that many people is left behind. But it's not what Europe wants. The principle is repeated in the communication on a strong social Europe for just transition. And the word just means exactly no one is left behind. Just transition means no one is left behind. The word justice. I would say that the perspective that I've chosen from the beginning is there. The EU Commission has decided to find tools to protect workers from risks produced by the same green transition. So the green transition produces risks for some categories of workers. So we have to find ways to protect workers from the green transition risks. So I will not go, I will be very fast on this part, because Andrés, of course, as you have analyzed vulnerabilities. And there is a strict link between vulnerability and risks. When a worker is more vulnerable than another one, when a territory is more vulnerable than the other one, when there are no protection against risks. So workers are more vulnerable, which means they have a high risk exposure because there are no tools, no mechanisms to protect these workers from risks. I quoted you, Andrés. So which workers are more vulnerable? Which workers are more exposed to the risks of the green transition, and of course indirectly to the environmental risks? You have definitions in all these documents that I quoted, the Council recommendation on ensuring a fair transition towards climate neutrality. In the recital 10, for example, it is clearly said that the impact, the negative, the adverse impact, so the risks of the green transition will hit various sectors, occupation, regions and countries. And job losses are expected in some mining activities, for example, or fossil fuel-based energy production, as well in parts of the automotive sector. But of course there will be, yes? Yeah, 5 minutes, yeah. But if we want to know exactly what, this is an example of a sector, which sectors are more hit by the green transition risks, but which workers are more exposed to a high risk. Workers whose effective access to quality employment, including self-employment. Self-employed are vulnerable workers, or those workers that for their education or training are more exposed. But anyway, the criterion would be that workers are at risk of being significantly limited as a direct or indirect consequence of the green transitions. In the same documents, you find a kind of list of workers more exposed to the green transition, like older workers, adults with basic skills, low-skilled workers, workers, the so-called NEET, so not in employment nor in education, workers with disabilities, the self-employed, and among this list, you can have, more characteristic enhancing these risks. For example, if you are an adult with basic skills, and if you have a specific ethnic origin, or if you are of a certain age, or if you have a specific sexual orientation, then you are more exposed to these risks. But going very quickly to the end, what are the measures that can be adopted to protect, to face these risks for these categories of workers who are more exposed to the green transition, European green transitions? The measures are training, reskilling, and upskilling of workers, first of all, because workers not skilled and are not capable of, make the transition to the green jobs, for example. And that's the same issue for, digital technologies. Exactly, another kind of transition, but the same problems. Because the digital transition produces risks for the employment for many categories of workers. And one of the tools is vocational training, skilling, upskilling, reskilling workers. It's a way of anticipating risks. So we don't have to wait until the risk is, there. We have to anticipate risks. Another way of facing risks is a review of the unemployment schemes and of all system of indirect income support. For example, that in Spain you have the ERTE. It's a way of supporting income when workers cannot work anymore because there is a risk. During the pandemic, in Italy, in Spain, we have used a lot of this instrument. We have a short time reduction because workers could not work, and with the public support, workers and of course companies too were possible to continue the economic activity. They were supported by these measures, but they were supported by this measure through an European mechanism. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the program, with the regulation of SURE. SURE was a kind of a huge effort of the European Union on based on emissions of bonds, of social bonds. So very interesting for the financial institutions, and through the emission of these bonds guaranteed by the European member states, all the European member states, it was possible to finance these instruments. So to save, to find an instrument for protecting workers from the pandemic risk. I think that we should use this mechanism also for protecting workers from the environmental and green transition. Well, these are my conclusions, and there's no need to go to the conclusions.
Thank you very much, Piera. I know that you're all
tired,
all dying to go to the coffee break, but if anyone has an urgent question,
we can make it.
Go ahead.
Just a quick one. It's very interesting. Is there any estimate of how many people are at risk from the green transition? How many workers are at risk in all the, across Europe in all the sectors?
Oh, there are statistics, of course, but not worldwide statistics.
No, just for Europe.
Just for you, yes, there are.
How many people are?
I'm not a statistician, but there are for specific sectors. Of course, the more heat is the oil, traditional oil, energy, fuel sector, but we need a more granular.
Yeah, well, I was just wondering how big this problem is. It could be huge.
It is huge. Yeah, it is huge. But we need also, for research, we need more granular analysis on this. Definitely, by sector, by region, by categories of workers. We need it. Yeah. In this case, data are.